What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
You know that feeling when a tradition stops being something warm and starts feeling like a routine you're trapped in? That's what Christmas had turned into for me, but I didn't see it clearly until much later. For the longest time, I believed I was doing the right thing, stepping up for the family, being generous, keeping the spirit alive. It started right after Mom passed. That first Christmas was quiet, awkward, like everyone was afraid to acknowledge she was gone. So I offered to host. I bought the food, cleaned my place from top to bottom, decorated every corner like I thought she would have done. And people showed up. They smiled. They ate. They left. And not a single one of them offered to pitch in or even say thank you in a real way. But I didn't care that year. I told myself it was about love. About holding us together. The next year, it was at my place again. This time, a few of them texted ahead of time, asking if I could pick up certain things. My brother's wife wanted gluten-free everything. My cousin Mandy asked if we could skip turkey and do something less depressing. I still paid. Still cooked. Still smiled. That year, I noticed no one brought wine or gifts, even though we'd always done that growing up. But again, I let it slide. I had the good job. I was single. No kids. I could afford it. Or that's what they kept telling me. By the fourth or fifth year, it wasn't just dinner anymore. I was covering plane tickets, booking hotels, renting larger Airbnbs so the kids could have their own space. And I justified it all to myself in the quietest part of my mind, the part that didn't want to admit how tired I was. I'd tell myself things like, they've got student loans, or she just had a baby, or they're probably too proud to ask. But none of them ever did ask. They just expected. And I always delivered. This year, something felt different before it even began. It was late November, and the usual flurry of texts hadn't come. Normally, I'd start getting vague messages from Mandy or my brother Dan, dancing around the topic of Christmas plans. Have you thought about where to do it this year? Or just checking in on the Airbnb situation. But this year, there was silence. I waited a few more days, then finally sent out a message myself. Just a simple, hey, what's the plan this year? No one replied for a full day. Then Mandy sent a half-hearted, we were assuming you'd do your usual magic again. That was the word she used. Magic. Like I was a holiday elf just waiting to drop thousands of dollars into a bottomless pit so everyone else could feel festive. Still, even after that, I considered it. I opened Airbnb. I started browsing places near Asheville, because that's where the majority of the family could drive in easily. I found a beautiful house, 4 bedrooms, fireplace, decent kitchen, and my finger hovered over the reserve button. But I didn't click. Not yet. A few days later, I got a text, one that was not meant for me. I was standing in line at the grocery store, scrolling aimlessly, when it popped up on my screen. It was from Mandy. Or rather, it was a screenshot forwarded by Mandy to a group I wasn't supposed to be in. The text thread was between her, Dan, my cousin Greg, and Dan's wife. The message said, I swear, if Leah bails this year, someone else better pony up. I'm not dealing with her drama. Then someone replied, she won't. She never does. She's our money mule. Another message, yeah, she acts like she's being generous, but she just likes the control. Followed by laughing emojis. I stood there, holding a frozen turkey in one hand and my phone in the other, and I could feel heat rising up the back of my neck, not just from anger, but from shame. I hadn't even realized how much I wanted their gratitude until I saw how little respect they had for me. I didn't answer right away. I left the grocery store with nothing in my cart. I sat in my car for 15 minutes, rereading the messages over and over, like maybe I'd misunderstood the tone or context. But no, it was clear. This wasn't new. This was a running joke. Something they'd probably said for years. I was the fool who thought I was helping, while they rolled their eyes and chuckled behind my back. And still, part of me wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. Part of me wanted to just swallow it. Move on. Book the place. Be the bigger person. That part of me was still hanging on when I got a follow-up text from Mandy. A separate one. Just for me. Hey Leah, did you reserve the house yet? We figured you would. Just send the confirmation when it's done. She didn't know I'd seen the other messages. She didn't know I was already staring at the full weight of what they thought of me. And in that moment, something inside me finally shifted. Not exploded. Not snapped. Just clicked. Like a door quietly closing after being left open for too long. I didn't respond to Mandy. I didn't tell her I saw the texts. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there in my car, and for the first time in over a decade, I realized I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to rescue anyone. I didn't have to pay for one more thing. And I didn't owe them an explanation. What I did next wasn't loud. It wasn't even mean. But it was deliberate. And once I started, there was no going back. I didn't sleep that night, but not in the dramatic, tossing and turning way you see in movies. It was quieter than that, slower. My mind just kept pacing in circles, replaying each line from that message thread like a skipping record I couldn't shut off. I thought about every Christmas past, every time I brushed off a missed payment, every joke I didn't catch at the time, every side glance I ignored because I wanted to believe they were just tired or stressed or distracted. Not laughing at me behind my back like I was some gullible idiot who'd keep showing up with open arms and an even more open wallet. And the more I thought about it, the more the pieces started clicking together in ways that made me feel like I had been blind for years by choice, not ignorance. That was the part that stung the most, not that they used me, but that deep down I might have known it all along and just chose to keep pretending otherwise. The next morning, I opened my phone and stared at Mandy's message again. Just send the confirmation. No please. No thank you. No question mark. Just a directive, like I was a hotel concierge, not her cousin, and certainly not the one footing the entire bill year after year. I didn't answer. I didn't open the Airbnb app either, even though it had become muscle memory at this point. For the first time in over a decade, I didn't move immediately to make everyone else's holiday happen. I sat with that silence, and it was uncomfortable at first, like I was breaking a rule I didn't even realize I'd signed up for. By noon, the silence started getting noticed. My brother Dan texted, "Hey, everything okay? Haven't heard about the rental." No warmth. Just fishing. An hour later, Greg chimed in with a message in the group chat. "So, what's the plan this year? Leah? You alive?" I stared at that one for a while. Not because it was particularly cruel, but because it was so casual. So easy. Like I was just an appliance that had stopped working properly and needed a reset. And still, I said nothing. Instead, I went back through years of messages, emails, even old bank statements. Not because I needed proof of what I'd spent, I remembered every charge, but because I wanted to see it in writing to remind myself that I wasn't crazy. There it was. The 5-bedroom cabin from 3 years ago. $2,000, paid in full, and not one person offered to split it, even after Dan said he would Venmo me later. The year I bought 6 plane tickets because Mandy had a glitch with her card. The time I paid extra for the pet-friendly rental because Greg couldn't find a sitter for his ancient lab. Each line item sat there like a receipt not just for money, but for all the tiny ways I let myself be convinced that generosity meant silence, that love meant carrying weight without asking for help, and that family meant tolerating being undervalued because it's what good people do. Around 5 that evening, I got another message, this one from Mandy again, but on the side, separate from the group. "Hey, not to be pushy, but we need to know soon. I already told the kids we're staying in the mountains again." That line, "I already told the kids," hit me harder than I expected. Because it wasn't just that they expected me to pay. They had planned on it. Without asking. Without checking. Without even the courtesy of pretending they might have to make other arrangements. I wasn't a person to them in this context. I was a resource. A tool. A reliable transaction. And what chilled me most was how normal it had all become for them, and for me. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being Leah, their cousin, their sister, the woman who stayed late cleaning up after Christmas dinners and who sent extra gifts for the nieces and nephews when their parents forgot, and had instead become this reliable fixture, this financial cushion they could mock in private and rely on in public. And I had let them. I had trained them year after year that there would be no consequences, that I would keep showing up, that I didn't need acknowledgement, let alone respect. that I would cover everything and say nothing. I didn't answer Mandy's message. I didn't open the group chat. I didn't respond when Dan called later that night, then again the next morning. I let it all pile up, unread, unanswered, untouched, because for the first time in years, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Not because I was tempted to cave. I wasn't. But because I realized that if I was going to step out of this role they had written for me, I needed to do it with full clarity, not out of impulse. I wasn't interested in a fight. I didn't want some messy screaming match or a dramatic confrontation where I finally stood up for myself, just to be talked over, minimized, or manipulated into feeling guilty again. I wanted something quieter. Something cleaner. Something they would feel in their bones long after the holidays ended. So I started taking notes. Not dramatic ones. Just a quiet little list of every account they had access to. The shared Netflix I paid for, that they all used. The Costco membership Mandy always used my card for. The Amazon Prime account Greg logged into every December to buy gifts in a rush. The Airbnb reservation I hadn't made yet, but that I now knew I never would. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't even going to warn them. I was just going to disappear from the role they had assigned me. Let them make their plans. Let them assume I'd step in like always. Let them sit with the silence long enough to realize it meant something this time. That maybe, just maybe, the person they took for granted wasn't waiting on them anymore. And maybe, if they paid attention, they'd notice that the money mule had finally stopped carrying the load. By the third day of silence, the pattern was unmistakable. Though I imagine none of them would have called it that. They were too used to the rhythm of my compliance, the ease with which I made things happen without complaint, without delay, without even the small pause of hesitation that might suggest I wasn't entirely on board with the routine they'd carved out for me over the years. And that was the part that felt most surreal as I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and staring at the blinking cursor of my unread messages. They weren't worried. They weren't even angry yet, because they still believed, with absolute certainty, that I would cave, that I would do what I always did, which was shoulder the weight for the sake of family, for the sake of keeping things pleasant, predictable, and polished, even when it came at the cost of my own peace. I scrolled through the group chat again, this time not to react, but to observe, to really see them for who they were when they thought I wasn't listening. Greg had sent a message that morning that summed it all up more clearly than anything else could have. Don't stress. She'll do it. She always does. It was such a simple sentence, so casual, and yet it landed like a final confirmation that everything I had suspected was true. There was no ambiguity anymore, no room left for giving them the benefit of the doubt. They didn't just take advantage of me passively, they counted on it. They factored it into their planning, the way you'd assume the sun would rise or the grocery store would be open. And the part of me that used to flinch at the idea of disappointing them, that still heard my mother's voice whispering about grace and duty and how important it was to keep everyone together, finally went still. I hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. I hadn't answered Mandy's texts or returned Dan's calls or clicked the join button on the Google Doc they had started to coordinate who was bringing what dish, as if that ever mattered, since I was always the one who ended up cooking anyway. And for the first time, instead of feeling anxious or selfish or like I was letting someone down, I felt steady. Not angry, not hurt, not even righteous. Just steady. Like a decision had been made at a level deeper than thought. That morning, I opened my laptop and started taking small, quiet actions, not to punish anyone, not to create drama, but to methodically dismantle the invisible structure that had been built on my back for over a decade. I logged into the Airbnb account, found the reservation I had pre-booked in a moment of muscle memory 2 weeks earlier, a beautiful 4-bedroom cabin just outside Asheville, with a big kitchen and a deck overlooking the mountains, and I clicked cancel reservation. No note, no warning, no refund sent to anyone else because no one else had chipped in. It had been booked entirely on my card, like always. I watched the cancellation email hit my inbox and moved on. Next was the shared Costco membership that Mandy used monthly for diapers and party trays, always with a sheepish, "I'll send you something for that," that never materialized. I removed her as an authorized user. Then came the family Hulu account, which Dan's kids used almost exclusively, followed by Amazon Prime, which Greg had logged into just last week to order some random camping gear he probably assumed I wouldn't notice. I changed all the passwords. All of them. Then, finally, I opened my bank app and shut down the prepaid family gift card account I had quietly funded every December, the one I used to load up with a few $100s so they could surprise each other, like we used to do when we were kids. No one ever asked where it came from. They just used it. Each of these actions took no more than a minute or two, but together they felt monumental, like turning off life support on something that had been dead for years, something that had been artificially sustained by guilt, habit, and the illusion that I was somehow the glue that held our family together, when in truth I had become the scaffolding they leaned on while building their own comfort. And once I removed that scaffolding, I knew, in a way that wasn't emotional but simply factual, that the structure would tremble. Not collapse, maybe, but definitely shift. And not because I wanted it to fall, but because it was never supposed to rest on one person in the first place. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Dan's wife, which was unusual. She rarely contacted me directly, probably because we'd never really clicked. She wrote, "Just wanted to check in. I assume you've booked the cabin already? Kids are getting excited." No greeting. No real warmth. Just that same baseline assumption that I was doing what I always did, moving silently in the background to make things smooth and magical for everyone else. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the message. I just stared at it for a moment, then closed my phone and set it face down on the counter. Because at that point, I had already made the decision that would change everything, not just for this Christmas, but for everyone after. I was done being the default. I was done playing the role of the giver whose value only existed in what she provided, never in who she was. And the truth is, once I stopped moving in the way they were used to, it wasn't that hard to see the gaps, to realize how quickly their plans would start to unravel without my quiet, unpaid labor holding it all together. I wasn't waiting for them to notice. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I didn't need a reckoning or a dramatic confrontation. I just needed space. Space between who I had been and who I was ready to become. Space between their expectations and my silence. And in that silence, I was starting to hear something new, not anger, not sadness, but something steadier, something like strength, something like freedom. The days leading up to Christmas were always, without fail, the same chaotic mix of late-night texts, last-minute grocery runs, flight coordination, and endless questions about sleeping arrangements, dish assignments, and who was bringing what. But this year, as the calendar inched closer to December 25th, the silence from my end had created a vacuum none of them quite knew how to fill, and watching them slowly come to terms with that fact, in real time, through an escalating flurry of increasingly desperate messages, was the first time in years I felt like I had taken my life back from a family that had mistaken my reliability for obligation. What surprised me most wasn't their confusion or the tone-deaf nudges disguised as check-ins. It was the complete absence of actual concern, as if my lack of response could only be interpreted as me falling behind on my responsibilities, rather than a signal that maybe, just maybe, I had finally decided to stop playing the role they had so conveniently written for me. By the end of that week, I had received 9 separate texts from Dan, each one more impatient than the last, ranging from, "Just want to make sure we're still good for the cabin," to, "Leah, we're running out of time, don't wait until the last second again," to, finally, a curt, "We're not kids anymore, this isn't cute." And that last message, that small, passive-aggressive reprimand, was the final push I needed to take the last few steps in the quiet erasure of the infrastructure I had built for them, because there it was, plain and sharp. The same tone I had heard in different words for years. The implication that I was somehow failing them, that I was causing a problem by not stepping up fast enough, loud enough, big enough. I logged into the shared Dropbox where I used to keep the digital Christmas budget tracker, the one I had created 5 years ago so everyone could stay on the same page, even though I was always the only one who ever updated it, and I deleted the folder. I cleared the Google Sheets with their endless tabs labeled groceries, decor, gift ideas, and reimbursements that had never seen a single reimbursement from anyone but me. I closed the meal delivery subscriptions I'd set up under my name so Greg's family could get fresh meals that week without having to cook, and I removed the auto-renew on the annual Zoom family trivia game subscription I'd bought 2 years ago during lockdown. None of these were things anyone had ever thanked me for, but they were all things I had been expected to maintain, like the unseen janitor in the background of their perfect holiday memories. I didn't announce any of it. I didn't type a long text or post a cryptic status or drop hints in the chat that I was rethinking this year. I didn't want drama, and I didn't need recognition. I just wanted out, not from my family entirely, but from the unspoken job title they had given me without consent, the one labeled holiday facilitator and emotional accountant. And as I sat there watching each cancellation confirmation appear in my inbox, I didn't feel guilt or fear or hesitation. I felt clarity. Not coldness, not vengeance, just a kind of internal quiet that said, you don't owe anyone your silence anymore. What struck me most was how long it took them to realize something was off. They didn't panic when I went quiet. They didn't even think to check in with any real concern. They just kept assuming I'd come through, the way I always did, right at the 11th hour, apologizing for the delay and sweeping in with solutions. So when I didn't, when the silence stretched into full days, and then into the final weekend before Christmas, their messages shifted. Mandy texted, "Hey, can you at least let us know if you're okay?" Which might have felt like kindness if it hadn't come after 6 previous messages where she'd asked for the Airbnb address, the Costco list, and confirmation of what I was cooking. Dan followed with, "This is getting ridiculous," and then an hour later, "We can't keep waiting for you to get it together." It was almost funny, in a twisted way, how my silence, which had once been their comfort, was now their biggest source of unease, simply because it meant they might have to do things themselves. On the 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, I got a phone call from Greg, not a text, not a voicemail, but an actual call, which I didn't answer. He didn't leave a message. A few hours later, he sent a text that read, "You're ruining everything. Why are you acting like this?" And that was when I realized the shift was complete. I had gone from being the dependable doormat to the villain in their story, all because I had quietly chosen not to be exploited anymore. Not with a bang. Not with a scream. Just with absence. By Christmas Eve, the group chat had exploded with frustration. "Does anyone know if Leah's okay?" Mandy asked. "She's fine," Dan replied. "She's just doing this on purpose." No one suggested checking in with me directly. No one asked if I needed help or if maybe I had a reason for not responding. It wasn't about me. It was about what I hadn't provided, what I hadn't booked, what I hadn't solved. That was all I had ever been to them, a quiet fixer in the background, the holiday ghost who made things appear out of thin air and then disappeared before anyone had to think too hard about where it all came from. That night, I turned off my phone. Not just do not disturb. Not just silence. I powered it down completely, set it in a drawer, and went to bed without the weight of someone else's timeline pressing against my chest. I had no tree, no dinner to prep, no Amazon packages on the porch, no itinerary to finalize. Just my own quiet space, and for once, the knowledge that I had drawn a line not with noise, but with stillness. And in the morning, when they woke up to find no cabin, no dinner, no plans, and no one to blame but themselves, I would be exactly where I needed to be. Gone. Quiet. Free. When I woke up on Christmas morning, the house was so quiet it felt like it had been deliberately staged that way, as if the universe wanted to give me one uninterrupted breath before the rest of the world barged in demanding explanations, apologies, or at the very least, answers I no longer owed. There was no sound of children tearing open gifts, no pots clinking in the kitchen, no background hum of forced laughter echoing from people pretending to enjoy each other out of habit or tradition. Just silence, deep and clean, the kind of silence that doesn't ache but exhales, like it had been waiting for me to notice it all along. And as I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that didn't need to be rushed, reheated, or left half drunk while I cooked for people who'd show up late without even a bottle of wine, I felt, for the first time in a very long time, entirely in control. Not of them, not of the narrative, but of myself, of my choices, of my time. The notifications had started rolling in long before I opened my phone. I could sense it, like static in the air. And when I finally powered it on slowly, deliberately, it lit up like a slot machine that had just hit some kind of grotesque jackpot. 23 unread texts, 5 voicemails, 3 missed calls from Dan, 2 from Mandy, and a dozen more from various family members who hadn't spoken to me in months, but were suddenly extremely invested in my availability. The group chat was flooded with messages sent between midnight and dawn, some frantic, some passive-aggressive, and a few that were so riddled with sarcasm and entitlement that I had to read them twice to confirm they were real. Dan's first message said, "We're outside the cabin, and there's no one here. Did you give us the wrong address?" Followed an hour later by Leah. "This isn't funny. People flew in for this." Then Greg chimed in with, "You said you were handling it. We could have made other plans if you weren't." Mandy's message was particularly rich. "This is incredibly hurtful. I had to explain to my kids that there's no Christmas dinner and no place to stay because Aunt Leah just vanished. You always say you care about family, so what is this?" Each message dripped with shock and confusion, but not a single one of them even hinted at remorse or self-awareness. There were no apologies, no questions about how I was, no acknowledgement of what they'd said, what they'd done, what they had taken for granted. Just panic. Just inconvenience. Just the sudden, jarring realization that the person they had quietly relied on for everything had finally stopped showing up. I didn't reply, not at first. I wanted them to sit in it a little longer, to feel the edges of what they had created, not out of cruelty, but because some lessons don't land until the silence becomes unbearable. I let the messages pile up for another hour. A few veered toward guilt-tripping. Dan wrote, "Mom would be so disappointed," as if invoking the name of a woman who spent her life apologizing for other people's behavior would magically bend me back into shape. But I didn't move. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I simply waited. And then, when the timing felt right, not rushed, not delayed, I opened my photo gallery, found the screenshot I'd prepared the night before, and sent it without a word. It was a single image, but it said everything. At the top, a list of closed accounts: Amazon, Costco, Hulu, Netflix. Below that, a snapshot of the Airbnb reservation, marked canceled with a big red line through the dates. At the bottom, a banking app screen showing 0 balances across the holiday fund, folders I used to top up every November. No captions. No explanation. No final monologue or emotional punctuation. Just data. Just facts. Just the evidence of absence made visible in a way that was undeniable, unemotional, and completely irreversible. The chat went dead for almost 15 minutes. No one replied. No one called. The silence that followed wasn't like the silence from earlier in the week, the one filled with waiting and assumption. It was heavier, loaded. Like someone had finally pulled the curtain back and forced them to see the machine they'd been operating without ever checking where the power came from. And I knew, in that stillness, that something had cracked, not necessarily in them, though maybe, eventually, something would, but certainly in the pattern. In the grip they had on me. In the endless loop of obligation I had tied around myself like a safety net that had long since become a noose. I muted the group chat after that. I didn't block anyone. I didn't delete their numbers. I just turned down the volume on the noise I had mistaken for connection for far too long. I sat there, finished my coffee, and turned on a movie I wanted to watch, not a family favorite or something that had to keep the kids entertained, but something for me. I made a small lunch, read a few chapters of a book I hadn't touched in months, and spent the rest of the day doing nothing that required justification or performance. There were no gifts under a tree, no Instagram-worthy dinner spread, no coordinated outfits or matching pajama photos, but there was something else, something better. There was peace. There was space. There was the quiet comfort of knowing I hadn't burned anything down. I'd simply walked away from a house I was never truly welcome in to begin with. And as the sun started to set and my phone buzzed one last time, just once, I didn't look. I didn't need to. Because whatever it said, whatever excuse or plea or accusation it carried, it didn't matter anymore. I had already made my move. Not out of spite, Not out of rage, but out of something harder to explain and much more powerful, clarity. They called me the money mule for years without ever once asking what it cost me to keep carrying that weight. And now that I had put it down, without ceremony, without spectacle, they were finally forced to pick it up for themselves. Or drop it completely. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. And maybe, just maybe, they'd remember this Christmas not as the year I ruined everything, but as the year they had to face what they'd built. Without me,